Good morning and welcome to not Sunday, I'm fast, Saturday's SOM lecture series. So glad that you're here today, and I have something special, I think, in store for you as we look at spirit, as we look at the concept of spirit today. So first thing I would tell everybody to do is share this link with some friends, some family, to your sites, so we can get everyone beginning to understand and become steeped in the way of living according to the universal principles of religious science and science of mind. And so last week, I know you kind of led up to this whole moment of spirit, the animating principle of life. And I think today is going to be very special, because what we want to look at is, what is spirit? Now, when you read the chapter in the book, there's a lot in there, but I want to just focus on the thing itself, spirit. And so as we begin to go through this, we'll go back and forth. And if you have any comments, please drop them in the comment section, so that we can really go deep into this concept and really begin to figure out how to activate it in our lives. And additionally, how to recognize the presence of spirit. Now, it's always there. It's never not there, but we want to recognize what it's like to be fully aware that the presence of God is there and that we can use it. So we're going to start here with what is spirit. Now, I'm going to go through these very quickly, and then we're going to break each one of them down. So spirit is the animating agent of all things. It is the vital essence, life force, energy that is first cause. And as the master teacher Jesus said, God is spirit, so we should worship in spirit and truth. The other thing is, spirit is a great word for God, I believe. It really encapsulates it, because spirit can be seen like the wind, everywhere present. And I give you a misnomer, really, because you can't see the wind. You only see the effects of wind, or the manifestation of wind, although you know it's there. And within that spirit, within that wind, within that container, all things are contained. All things are contained. Now, let's just break this down a little bit. So it says spirit is the animating feature, the animating agent of all things. Now, what does that mean? That means that God, spirit, the infinite, all intelligence, however you need to articulate it so that it means something to you. And that's why I say I think spirit is a great way to look at it, and to put it in terms of wind, a metaphor of using wind, that it is something that we see the results of it, but we never see the thing itself. But we know that it exists. We know that the wind exists. Anybody that's been in Colorado for the last couple of weeks, for sure, when we had winds varying all the way up to 30, 40 miles an hour, you never saw the wind, but if there was snow on the ground, you saw the snow blowing around, or the leaves, or the dust. And so when we look at it, we not only understand that spirit, like the wind, is unseen, but it is an animating agent. It causes things to move. It causes things to be uplifted. And then the next point is, it is vital. When we look at our lives, there are a lot of things we can go without. We can go without water for a long period of time. We can go without food for a long period of time, but you cannot go without air for any length of time that's appreciable, 3 to 5 minutes without air, and we have some permanent damage. And so the spirit of the divine is that animating force. It's that life-giving force. It's that thing that's unseen that is first cause. When a child is born, if you've had the blessing of seeing a child being born and watch that child come to life, so to speak, the first thing that they do is they take in that breath. It is the first cause for them to be present on this plane. And so that sets the stage for what Jesus said. The master teacher said, God is spirit and we should worship it in spirit and truth. Now we got a little understanding about what the spirit part is. The next thing is, what is truth? What is this whole thing about spirit and truth? Well, truth, which is sometimes confused with facts, are not the same thing. Truth is something that is self-evident. It speaks for itself. It needs no explanation. Now, it may need some articulation to understand it better, but it needs no description. There is the truth that fire burns is self-evident. However, we may need some words to explain that. We may need a way of letting people understand what that means in different contexts, whether it's my skin, whether it's my house, whether it's the leaves. But the truth of the matter that fire burns is unmistakable. And so when we see these master words from Jesus that says we worship God in spirit and truth, that's what that means. That we worship not worship it in some way that takes you outside of your intelligence, but worship it in the sense that we respect it, that we utilize it, that we understand its use and how to put it in our lives. And when we can do that, we begin to understand what truth is in any aspect of life. It is those things that are self-evident. Now, when we see this last point I want to make about contained in all things, when is contained in all things. And within the wind, although they may be microscopic, there is moisture in the wind, there is dust in the wind, there are all kinds of different particles in the wind. And from within that, all the elements to create all things are in that invisible force called the wind, self-contained. That is the perfect expression of what God is, of what spirit is. It is this self-contained entity that has all elements that creates or has the potential to create all things. That has the potential to create all things. Now, when we are able to do that, and by do that, I mean step inside the understanding of what spirit is, we're now prepared for a life that's unbounded. We're now prepared for a life that's full of grace, that's full of joy, that's full of expression, because we know within, whether it's within us or the container of life that we are within, all things are possible. All things can be achieved. And when that is understood perfectly, we can move forth in a spirit of God and a spirit of truth that allows us to resolve situations, to uplift people, to resolve illnesses and healing and all manner of things. And so I'm going to stop right here and see if there's any questions over here that we may want to talk to right now. Here's one by Roy that says, do we believe in the Trinity like the traditional Christians? Well, in a matter of speaking, yes, but not in the same way as the Christians have articulated it, in that there is this manifestation of spirit that is a physical, mental, and emotional way of manifesting things, right? That's one way of looking at a Trinity. Mind, body, and soul, right? We have different ways of articulating how things operate in this invisible plane and then become manifest. And that's what the traditional Christian religion is trying to articulate, I believe, and from my studies, is that there's this process, there's this system of flow that makes things happen. And they have chosen to articulate it in threes, in a Trinity. Now, if you go to another system of knowledge and understanding, they may represent it in fours or sevens or nines. So because when we begin to look at some of the ancient teachings, different systems use different numerical numbers. And if you look at numerology and go in a little bit to that science, all of these numbers are sacred numbers. They're either prime numbers or numbers that are generated from some factor of something. And that's what is meant, I believe. And from my study of it, because it perplexed me at the very beginning as well, that here we are dealing with this process of manifestation. And we can break the process of manifestation down into any number. I mean, you take the process of birth, right? We've put it in the context of 9 months, right? As milestones, right? There's the first trimester, the second trimester, and then boom, the baby is born. However, we know that within each one of those trimesters, there's a whole nother time point, marking point of when the sperm and ovum connects and when the fetus starts moving and when fingers develop. So that's what is understood in that Trinity. It is a measurement. It is an articulation of a system of how things manifest from this invisible force called God or spirit or first cause. And I knew that was a little bit long-winded, but I think its purpose it's a great place to put it there because it sets up a nice thing for this next point, which is this. How do we describe spirit, right? How do we describe this thing that's unseen, right? That we see the manifestation of it, but we don't quite know how to explain it all of the time. Well, I think this might give you some insight in it. It says here, the point I want to make is that the Mother, Father, God are the principle of unity that speaks to the completeness of life and all things is how we describe spirit. Now, in essence, or in simpler terms, spirit is this complementary aspect of things, the in and the out of things, that contains all things, that allow things to be complete. Now, what do I mean by that? So we can stick with this example of birth, right? When we have the birth take place, there is a mother-father principle. There's a masculine and feminine principle that connect. That at first were two separate parts, but they come together in a wholeness and create a unity in the thing called life, the baby, right? And now we can extrapolate that principle to be the world, the universe, right? Boom. And so within that completeness of life, when the sperm and the ovum come together, everything that is needed for two little small things that you have to look at in a microscope contains everything it needs to create life. And I don't mean just a physical manifestation. Create life in terms of circulatory systems and consciousness and hearts and lungs and understandings and feelings. It completes a self-contained unity that is a manifestation of spirit itself. That is a manifestation of spirit itself. So when we can step into that place of understanding and being able to describe spirit or God or the first cause, pick the name that really resonates with you and gives you a feeling. Doesn't really matter because we're describing something that we can't see. And we're trying to use these words to articulate the point that it's animating and it means something to me. And then when we can do that, we can go to that next point that says it is undivided, having no opposites and no oppositions. Undivided, no opposites and no oppositions. Now that might be a little bit to get your head around, right? Because I just talked about the mother, father, God, where are they in opposites? Well, they are not opposites. They are compatible energies that are not in opposition, but are in creativity together. They don't oppose each other. You don't see the egg and the sperm fighting to not get there, to not connect, to make life. You know, as the saying goes, the thing that you're calling or the thing that you're seeking is also seeking or calling you. There's a mutual understanding of coming together to always create wholeness and unity that is ever present in life. And so when we see this idea of mother, father, God, or the masculine female principle, we don't want to get it stuck on a physical presence. It's a principle that we're dealing with here. When that principle, those individual principles are present, they're always seeking the unity. They're always seeking the oneness to create this wholeness of life, to create this place, this power, this presence that is invisible to be manifested, so that it's known, so that it's recognized and can be used. And when that is happening in our lives every day, it's great. You know, now some people might say, oh, well, you know, I can't stay focused. I can't. Well, you know, think about baseball, right? If you have a batting average of about 350, that's a pretty good batting average. That means, you know, you're only hitting 35% of the balls that come your way. But that's great. I mean, you can get in, if you're batting consistently at 350, 355, 360, them Hall of Fame numbers right there. So each one of us are living in a presence where we can be Hall of Famers if we understand this and use it. So that's how we would describe spirit. So we kind of got an understanding of what spirit is. We got some tools to work with, some ideas to extrapolate and to study, to describe spirit to someone else. And so I'm going to stop right there before we move on and see if there's any questions on spirit right here. Here's a comment here. In explaining spirit, is that what is meant when it is said in the book Metaphysics Begin where physics leaves off? And here's another one. Meaning there is nothing outside or separate from this one thing. We are as much of its omnipresence as everyone else is. Now, and that's a great point. I wanted to bring that up because there is this oneness, there's this omnipresence of things. And when we speak about it in metaphysical terms, we can kind of extrapolate a little bit on the mother-father principle. And you know, some of you may be able to identify with this. If you were young and you know, you got in trouble, and mom would say, just wait till your father gets home. I'm going to tell him. And your father could be out of town, right? But there's that unseen presence of father that got you to straighten up in a lot of cases. Maybe not all cases, you know, because as you got to be a teenager, you rebelled against that. But that presence was there, that although the physical thing itself was not there. And so when we look at things metaphysically, we're looking at them beyond a physical presence. We're looking at them beyond the idea of having to see it, to believe it, right? It is activated enough in my life. I've seen it operate. So when it goes to a metaphysical place, I can begin to extrapolate. I can begin to understand things in the unseen world. And that's basically what the metaphysics of life means. It's how do we extrapolate backwards, if you will, into this point where we can begin to think about things and envision things that we can't see. And that leads perfectly into the next slide here in terms of spirit in action, right? So when we look at spirit in action, what are we talking about? We're talking about how does this invisible thing do things that creates things that we never see the thing that does the creating, right? And so here are some points on that. That the action of spirit is creativity. So the lifeblood, if you will, of God, this thing itself is creative. It creates. So when we look around the world, the planet, the universe, we see all kind of creations. You know, you step into the animal world, and there are all manner of insects and vertebrates and mammals, and there are things that we continually discover, or scientists continually discover in the physical life form world, as we call it, that have never been seen in conditions that people think nothing can exist. That is the creativity of spirit, of having all things within itself and saying, hey, how can I mix this to create something new? Which leads to that point next there, that there are no limits in creativity. There are no limits in creativity and the way it can be displayed. That's why we find all these various life forms and rock forms and planets and stars and laws, all these things, because this nature of spirit is action. The nature of spirit is creative. And it works in the seen and the unseen world, right? Seen and unseen world. So now we lead into that metaphysical piece. Metaphysics is beyond physics. That's what it means. Meta, beyond physics, right? And so physics, we know, deals with the physical properties of this universe. When we start doing metaphysics, now we're extrapolating backwards. We're trying to move back to first cause. And so when you look at scientists, no matter what the field is, each scientist starts with one premise. I wonder what happened here. I wonder what causes this. They start with a thesis statement, right? Of something that they may have got an inkling of or seen, and then they are trying now to figure out, okay, how did that happen? Where did this come from? Or what happens if I put these two things together? And then they begin to extrapolate in the metaphysical world. And so once we get that understanding of how spirit acts and what it does in action, then we can get to this last point that says the medium from which it operates is law, which is the agent or means by which something is done or conveyed. Which something is done or conveyed. Now, here we begin to think about, how do we move forward in life? How do we operate? Right? You hear us in this teaching always talking about principle and law and how they work and what they mean. But right here, I want to kind of point to this fact that the medium through which spirit, this invisible thing, happens is through law. Right? And so when we go here and look at what is law, right? It is a rule or set of rules that operates within a system of wholeness. It is a timeless component of nature and the means of operation for spirit. Now, let's just break that down. A rule or a set of rules that operate within a wholeness. That means in everything that's created, let's go back to our example of life itself, there are some laws that have to be in place for that spirit to take place and be represented. If the egg and sperm are trying to get together, there has to be a certain temperature that's present. If that temperature is not at the right range, and it's not an exact point. There is a range, which means there is this place for individuality and operation in different environments. But if that temperature range is not in the right place, no dice. Nothing's going to happen. Second thing, if the environment is too acidic or not enough pH or over pH, the same thing will happen. These are laws through which spirit operates. This is the medium through which they operate. And they are timeless. The way life has been created on this earth, no matter how we look at the representation of it, these laws have always been there, whether we knew they existed or not. Whether they knew, and that exemplifies this invisible presence that causes things to be created, that causes things to be in action, to be in motion. And so I see, I hope the blurriness is cleared up. I'll make this a bigger thing. You can see that better maybe. And when I do that, that will make myself in that smaller image go a little smaller. I hope that's hasn't been too distracting there. But this is what we talk about when we talk about law: set of rules that operates within a system of wholeness that are timeless, and it is the means to which we understand and see the manifestation of spirit. And if some of you who've heard me before, the best thing, you talk about laws, and the law of electricity, I think, is a perfect one, because there are different laws that will cause different methods of obtaining electricity that are extracted from a principle, and whether that's thermal electricity or hydroelectricity or fossil, carbon or combustion electricity, there are many different extractions from that principle electricity to create these laws, which leads us to the last thing before we go into a question and answer. And I'll stop right there just to let everybody kind of digest. I know I'm throwing this at you fast, and that's what happens when you're excited about stuff. When you really feel the spirit, if you will. And I'm excited about this stuff because it has done so much for me, and I've seen it operate in so many people's lives that make a difference, that changes this concept of really understanding spirit or God, the thing itself. And when that happens, we're able to really begin to, as the words, operate in this mystical presence of life that operates, almost primarily in this metaphysical world, where we are able to look at things and allow them to come in and out of focus to create different experiences and different expressions and different understandings of life itself, of God itself, and more importantly, yourself, to understand better who you are and how these principles and laws and things operate in your life that allow you to move beyond anything you ever thought you could do. Anything you ever thought you can do. And so here in this next slide, we want to talk about this principle, right? Because we always hear people saying, oh, there's these principles of life and so forth and so on about principles. But what are they? What is it? How does it complete this, if you will, as Roy said, this trifecta, this trinity of understanding, right? Well, the first thing we understand about principles, which lines up directly with this whole idea of metaphysics, it's invisible. No one has ever seen the principle of electricity. In some cases, they may not truly understand or be able to visualize the laws. Now, they can mathematically write them out with an equation, and then from that perspective, okay, the law becomes visible in that respect in terms of a representation. But the thing itself, electricity, that happens after we put these other things in place, right? So the first thing is the principle of electricity itself is invisible. And it comes from a theoretical base, meaning it comes from a base of conjecture, a place of questioning, a place of trying to describe the unseen or the misunderstood. And when that happens, the principle seen, known, and expressed through manifestation. That's how we know it. We don't see it. It becomes presence by being seen or how it expressed or through manifestation. And it operates in a field of absolute intelligence. It operates in a field of absolute intelligence. And so when that happens, when we're operating from that standpoint, that we are moving and having our being in this invisible environment, and that it's theoretical in that I can come up with a theory. If a theory pops into my head, you think about the first time Edison or Tesla or all the various number of people who were experimenting with electricity. Imagine the moment when this idea popped into their head from invisible, right? They're maybe in the park and something invisible sparked them to have this theory of what happened. Same thing with Newton. Newton's sitting in the tree, sitting in the park, if you will, under the tree. The apple falls, and he says, what is this invisible thing that causes this apple to fall down? And he began to theorize, to come up with this thing of gravity. And the only way he understood it, he saw the apple fall, but he also, it was expressed through a manifestation of it hitting him in the head. Right? And so he began to go to work. And so from that standpoint, we begin to look at this principle, our principles themselves, in a way that allows us to be curious about life. Oftentimes in spiritual environments, you may hear someone say, if you want to understand life a little bit better, take on the persona of the observer, right? Of the observer. Someone, as best you can to extract yourself from the present moment in terms of being 100% there, but extract and begin to look at the different things that's going on, how the interactions take place. Because that's when we begin to realize certain principles or get an inkling of those principles and begin to work with them, begin to try to understand them. And by taking ourselves out of it as much as possible, and when we can get in certain meditative states, we can do all of it. We can go all the way out, right? But then it gives us a chance to see how things operate without our biases, without our own cultural lenses. And we can allow spirit to move freely. And when that happens, we can really begin to manifest our lives, happiness, finances, health, relationships. Because these invisible laws and principles and which are contained within spirit itself begin to show up more and more. And we can marry the masculine and the feminine of physics and metaphysics. We can bring those together to make a whole understanding of life, a whole understanding of how we operate. And so when we do that, we are in touch with spirit, and we can do exactly what Jesus said: worship God in spirit and truth. And so with that, I'll pause, take a break, say thank you for listening, and then we'll go and see if you got any questions, and spend these last couple of minutes with question and answer. Let's see here. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. Electricity always existed, so has spirit. That is the point. That is the point. Even if we go back to the many different theories of creation, whether it's the Big Bang or the explosion of a star. I mean, there are all these different theories. We go back to this theory thing of how the universe was created. Well, and we can debate that because it's theoretical, right? There are places and spaces for making different points and arguments. But one thing that I think is unarguable is that we are definitely here now. And we know just by being observant that anything we see, everything we see has come about through some process that has laws that are based on certain principles that, if we get out of the way, are not in conflict or opposition of each other. And so if we sit back and look at that, we can make a statement, I think, that's fairly accurate and fairly self-contained and supported, that there was a first cause. There was something in the very beginning that set all this into motion. Because even if you think about going from a big bang, right, to us thinking, seeing, feeling, recreating entities, sentient beings, feeling beings, there has to be some essence of those things in that wind principle, if you will, in that spirit that allowed it to come about. Nothing from nothing creates nothing. So even though we don't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. And so that point that electricity has always been there and always has is the same expression of spirit. And that's when we really begin to go deep into this teaching, go deep into this understanding and how we activate it in our lives. Let's see if there's any other questions. Somebody took a vamp. Diego took a vamp on my baseball example and said, "How many touchdowns do I need for that average?" Well, that's a great point, because the statistics in that arena, in that world, are quite different from baseball, right? Because in baseball, the batter gets up, if they bat the whole game, they get up 9 innings, right? Well, in football, if I get a lead, I may start off with my running back, but if I get a lead, I'm going to just throw the ball, right? Or vice versa, or some combination of that, depending on what your strategy is and how the other team is set up. And so even when we look at sports and competition, right? It's not opposition, it's competition. Let's be clear. There is this theoretical idea using principles that says, if they put out this defense and I put out this offense, theoretically, I should be able to score, or they should not be able to score. And within that, we begin to use different laws, different defensive, different positions, different players, right? To prove the point, right, of the competition, if you will. And that's what we're doing here in life. These principles can be used and represented and explained in any facet of our world. Sports, science, music, dance, it does not matter, because there is a unity, there is a oneness, there's a universal principle of spirit that moves through all things, gets manifested in different ways, but is able to be explained using all these different mediums. Because each one of those has a different law. The law of blue and red making purple is universal. It's universal. And so when we can understand that and begin to really try to place these principles and laws and operations and theoretical ideas into our life, we become the living spirit. We become the manifestation of this invisible principle, this invisible presence in action. And so with that, I'm going to say thanks for everyone that showed up. I hope there's something in this short talk that gets your wheels turning, that allows you to really begin to think about life differently and think about how it works and how you work within it. Because when we can do that consistently, We always see changes in our lives, changes in our world, and changes in those around us, because we become this magnet of truth and allow the Spirit to move through us. And so thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. I'm always excited for these Saturday morning lectures because, you know, we get a small amount of time to pack a whole lot in from the Science of Mind textbook. It gives us a lot of opportunities to move forward. So thanks for being here. I hope you come back next week. If you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, please send them to ntmedia.org and we'll take them in. You can, if this is off the air and you're looking at the recording, you can put your comments in there and we will still get them and still respond. And so with that, have a blessed day. Peace and blessings.